Hi there, I'm Dr. Deed Harrison. I'm the president of Chiropractic Biophysics, or CBP Technique, and I'm president of Chiropractic Biophysics Nonprofit, or CBP Nonprofit, our spinal research organization. We've been doing these weekly videos for CBP Nonprofit research publications where I personally walk you through the overview and the details of each individual publication. Now, to date, we have over 150 peer-reviewed research publications that have been sponsored or actually authored by CBP nonprofit researchers. And what I'm doing is going through each one almost in order of the date of their publication. So without further ado, let's go through research paper number 6. And keep in mind, it's not actually the 6th publication that we have. It's relatively consistent with the year 1996 and in fact just afterwards. So any ones that I miss, I'll pick up and go through them. I sit down and I decide which one I personally want to cover that day or that week, and that's what we do. So this particular project, this is video number 6. This came out in 1997 in the Journal of Spinal Disorders. Now this is a very important project to us, as we'll go through a little bit of the history. This project is the first time we sat down, we said, you know what, we need to really improve our lumbar spine model. We know that the model we've been presenting is not valid, but we didn't have an alternate explanation. So this particular project sets the stage for upcoming projects on CBP modeling of the sagittal plane curve. So 1997, Journal of Spinal Disorders, radiographic measurement characteristics of the sagittal lumbar spine from a normal population with a method to synthesize prior studies of lordosis. And you'll see what that means as we dive into the paper. Now, the lead author was Dr. Steve Taranovich, a former employee and CBP instructor of my father. Dr. Taranovich taught for my father in the 1990s and left in the early 2000s. Then Dr. Rene Caillet, that really, regarded as one of the world's most famous physiatrists, physical medicine specialist. He was chair of the department at USC for many, many years. My dad's PhD advisor, Dr. Tad Yannick, a PhD in mathematics at that time from the University of Alabama, Huntsville. My late father, Dr. Don Harrison, of course, DC PhD in math and master's degree in mechanical engineering. And then there's me, the last author, which technically I'm the senior supervising author on this particular project, but we didn't understand the implications of being the last author at this time. So classically, I probably should have been more in the middle here, not the senior supervising author, but whatever. Makes me look good as a young chiropractor a year out of graduation. I'm supervising these other doctors. So back to the study at hand. What's normal? This is a huge topic, and obviously it's a clinical conundrum, if you will. The problem is we really do need to establish normative data for everything in healthcare. No matter what you're talking about, if you're talking about internal medicine, if you're talking about anatomy, physiology, whatever it is, you have to have normal databases to compare or judge somebody against. It's the only way to truly identify abnormalities, pathologies, and diseases, right? So what's normal in the sagittal plane, lumbar spine? Very important topic. Now, the premise of this paper is, in fact, there is indeed a normal spinal model. That is actually a different topic that we'd have to investigate, but this is part of the equation, if you will, looking at normative data from asymptomatic and otherwise healthy persons and seeing, is there actually what we would call a human species specific shape and alignment for different parts of their spinal configurations or different parts of their spinal anatomy. In this case, we're talking about the thoracolumbar and pelvic region. So what is normal? Well, always CBP was based on historically the foundation of a normal spinal model. Our early models, up until this paper, were based on pieces of circle that could model or approximate the sagittal plane curve. So the lumbar spine was actually modeled with a piece of a circle. Now, if you look at this figure, you'll notice there's a very darkened line here in the lumbar spine. That's because what my dad did in this project, or for this project, we modified our spine model because it was shown as a piece of a circle, and following this, we identified it was not. So you can see he made my stepmother, Dr. Sang Harrison, go back and modify that. That's why it looks like a big, bold, funny shape in here in the lumbar region, because he was like, I'm not showing that circle anymore. It's not true, right? And how we know that's not true in part was based on this particular project. So in terms of the methods of this paper, 50 normal, retrospective, but consecutive subjects that met the inclusion criteria were used for this project. Now, as a background, what you'll find out is if you read this paper, there's a very nice project that we refer to and discuss that, you know what, the problem is in the literature, the definition of normal subjects is really, really inappropriate for the most part. Many projects, in fact, just simply say, oh, the subject's asymptomatic, so therefore they're normal. Or they use a simplified questionnaire that might only have a few questions on it. Rarely is a normal subject actually categorized and defined based on a normal neuromusculoskeletal examination, right? So you'll see what we did in this project. We think it's a very good project. Even though it's not prospective, it's retrospective, it's still a very good project the way we analyzed and basically included or excluded normal subjects. Now, to give you an example of this in the literature, in 1980 in the American Journal of Radiology, Fawn et al., they had 316 normal subjects aged 2 to 77 years of age. They had an equal gender ratio. This project was designed to look at normal distributions of the sagittal plane profile in normal subjects. Well, when you read the methods, not the abstract, what you'll find out, here's their definition of a normal subject. Quote, while the general status of some of these patients, keyword patients, was not optimal, it was assumed that the patients were sufficiently fit to be ambulatory if they could raise their arms above their shoulders. Now that's the definition of a normal subject in this 1980 paper. I mean, come on, give me a break. If you can raise your arm over your shoulder, you're normal? What a bunch of crap, right? So this is the problem we face in the literature. Even today, sometimes the definition of what constitutes normality is not truly presented in the methodology of the paper when we talk about sagittal plane configurations. So the other issue in this paper that is a confounding variable, in addition to what constitutes a normal subject, is how do we position somebody for the x-ray, and then what type of measurement techniques are we going to use? Well, number one, we're going to see we want to focus on upright weight-bearing x-rays. We do not want to include non-weight-bearing x-rays or seated x-rays. We know that those are going to have an effect on changing the sagittal plane lumbar curve and pelvic tilt and sagittal balance. So we want upright weight-bearing positioning, and we'll talk about that in a later slide coming up. Also then, we also want to look at what method of measurement do we use. Now, we've known from the past several videos that we use the Harrison posterior body tangent lines. Okay, so that's our methodology. The problem is you cannot directly compare that to the existing studies in the literature that use Cobb angles. Cobb angles are in-plate lines, and they're an attempt at a cross-sectional analysis through the curve. You've got this curve that runs like this. The posterior body lines are in fact tangent to the curve. Cobb angles are cross-sections through a curve. They're not exactly the angle of curvature. They depend on the slope of the end plate relative to the posterior body line. So we're going to have to see, can we compare our data to existing studies in the literature? We'll see we can, but it's not a one-to-one ratio, right? Ideally, there's an equation that you would use to convert between the two. However, there will be an individual subject difference even when you use the equation, because their body lines relative to the end plate lines are not exactly the same from person to person, right? So do you use end plate lines versus do you use posterior body lines? That's going to change the information. So what did we do? We collected 50 consecutive normal subjects retrospectively that were evaluated not for treatment purposes, but for a pre-employment physical exam. They needed to pass the physical examination to acquire a job at a shipping and packing company. So this is quite unique because these are not people coming to your office because they got a condition. These are people that the company is sending to a chiropractor, and it was Dr. Steve Taranovic's office, and these are people that he screened and did a proper evaluation in order to determine, are these healthy, fit subjects for shipping and packing and material handling at this job. So we have 50 consecutive subjects that fit the inclusion criteria. What's the inclusion criteria? Well, you have to have no medical history of back pain that requires limitations of daily activities and prevents you from doing work, so you're on work disability. Okay. Number 2, normal neuromusculoskeletal examination. So no pain on palpation, no point tenderness, right? Normal range of motion, not limited range of motion. And of course, malingering tests were used as well, right? So you got to go through and see, hey, is the subject faking this, and saying they don't have pain because they want a job? So you do your best to walk through these things. And then the big one that nobody can fake is normal anatomy on the x-ray. No anomalies were allowed, no overt degenerative disc disease, no pathologies and instabilities were permitted. So this is a true normal population, or as close to as you can get. Okay. Also, we did upright weight-bearing x-rays, a static standing lateral lumbopelvic x-ray using the posterior body tangent lines, looking at the relative rotation angles at each level, as well as the absolute rotation angle at a couple different levels. We used Ferguson's sacral base angle, that's S1 to horizontal, and then we actually included the old arcuate line here, even though the arcuate line we showed in an earlier project was unreliable. What we did here is we modified it to make sure that it was reliable. And the way we modified that old arcuate line is we used the posterior inferior body corner of S1 and drew that down to the top of the acetabulum. We found out that that's a reliable measurement. So this is our radiographic assessment. Now, the meat and the potatoes. Table 1 shows all 50 subjects with no history of back injury, no low back pain, no degenerative changes, at least overt ones, and no congenital spinal anomalies and instabilities. The average age, 27 years old, standard deviation 8. However, look at the age range, 17 years of age to 52. That's a pretty broad age range, okay? Height, 171 centimeters, standard deviation 9, minimum 152, maximum 188. Weight, almost 71 kilograms, pretty large standard deviation, which is typical, and then minimums and maximums. And what we'll find out in the next slide, we'll see that the females were just a little bit larger than typical, likely due to the job that they're pursuing. So the females have just a little bit higher of a body mass index, and we'll see what that might do to the sagittal lumbar spine. The ARA, L1 to L5, 39.7 degrees. Look, that's what we actually teach in the CBP literature.